I'm really sick of talking about sex, sexual deviance, people's endless pursuit of cum, but that's all the news cycle seems to care about. That's all millennials seem to care about. So, I am playing the hand I am dealt. Who am I to ignore the fact that people want to see zoosexuals in a more positive light? My doomed generation wants to view horsefuckers positively. I cannot ignore this. I cannot ignore the fact that my generation thinks that marriage is just for feels and not for extending the benefit of two families, having two families caring for a child. It all boils down to wanting to feel pleasure constantly, never wanting to feel any sort of discomfort, even if that discomfort only manifests itself emotionally. So we are going to talk about an inevitability of this approach to life, placing pleasure above all else. This one goes out to everyone who says, "What do you care what I do? Why do you care what I do? It's my body. Leave me alone. I'm who I want to be, not who you want me to be." I know that you who are of this mindset don't think about large-scale things like culture, society, behavior, and its impacts on culture and society. I know, you don't think about these things. I'm going to tell you something that they never taught to you in communication studies classes. You, in the United States, live in a culture that defines itself by the catastrophic coalescence of democracy, capitalism, and slave morality. Except that instead of the slaves being in servitude to a specific entity, you are left to your own devices, despite the fact that you have no qualifications to do so. You are a 95 IQ drone who thinks that buying shit and coming, that's what life is all about. And you vote in accordance to this lifestyle. And even if you don't check the mark on the ballot, you vote by spending money. You spend money to repair whatever dysfunction you brought upon yourself. And here's where I would talk about HIV cocktails, rectal prolapse surgeries, Ireland, gay Boy Scout leaders, pastors on Grindr. What did I tell you about this agenda kicking into the highest gear possible when kids are home from school? But like I said, I'm sick of talking about this shit. But not as much as I am hearing about it. So instead of talking about how meth addiction and HIV cocktails disrupt society's resources, I'm going to talk about this obscure documentary. And this documentary, which few people have seen, is called Heartbeat in the Brain, and it's made by a woman named Amanda Felding, and this movie came out in the 70s. I have not seen it. Few people have. It has been screened for people a handful of times since it was made. I'll read for you the Wikipedia entry for Heartbeat in the Brain. It is not very long. Heartbeat in the Brain is a 1970 documentary film produced and directed by Amanda Felding, an advocate of trepanation. In the film, Felding, a 27-year-old student at the time, drills a hole in her forehead with a dentist's drill. In the documentary, surgical scenes alternate with motion studies of her pet pigeon Birdie. In 1978, she screened the movie at Sweetums Gallery in New York. More than one audience member fainted during the climax. The 1998 documentary A Hole in the Head contains footage from Heartbeat in the Brain. The documentary, long believed to be lost, was publicly screened at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, London, on the 28th of April, 2011. I learned about this film's existence and trepanation about 2 years ago. And you're probably wondering what I was wondering when I first heard about this. Why the fuck would anybody put a hole in their head to expose their brain? Put a hole in their skull to expose their brain? Well, this article is a bit longer than the Wikipedia article, and this is from cabinetmagazine.org. I will try to remember to link it below in this article is about this film. You will soon know the psychotic reasoning behind Trepanation. On a Sunday afternoon in December 1970, Amanda Felding drilled a hole in her head. There was quite a lot of blood, she warns me when I visit her for lunch at Beckley Park, Felding's moated two-door mansion just outside Oxford, and sit down to watch the short film she made of her DIY surgery. It's not a difficult operation, she adds. Her pet African gray parrot nibbles her ear. Drilling a hole in one's head is really a nerve battle, doing something which obviously every instinct in your body is against. In a sense, it's quite satisfying that one can overcome one's nerves to do it. The film, titled Heartbeat in the Brain, shows her shaving her hairline, putting on a floral shower cap to keep back her remaining locks, fashioning a mask out of sunglasses and medical tape, injecting herself with a local anesthetic, and peeling back a patch of skin with a scalpel. With a look of determined, almost trance-like concentration, Felding then holds a dentist's drill to her head and, pressing the foot pedal that operates it, begins to push its grinding teeth into the frontal bone. Felding was a 27-year-old art student at the time and says that she was able to disassociate herself somewhat from the gory procedure by treating her head as if it were a piece of sculpture. She had arranged her tools in a neat row on a table draped in a white sheet. I'm quite cautious, and I'd prepared myself very carefully, she explains. I had an extra drill in case the other one broke down, which indeed it did. I'd gone into every detail. When she finally managed to bore through to the, and forgive me if I mispronounce this, I'm not fluent in Latin, dura mater, Felding grinned triumphantly as a geyser of blood gurgled from the half-centimeter wide opening and poured down her face, spotting the white tunic she was wearing with carnation-sized stains. A reviewer who saw Felding's film in 1978 when she showed it at the Sweetums Gallery in New York reported that at the climax of the operation, several members of the audience fainted, quote, dropping off their seats one by one like ripe plums, unquote. The film ends with footage of Felding bandaging her head and mopping up the blood from her face with water and cotton wool. She changes out of her bloody tunic into a colorful Moroccan kaftan and wraps a shimmering gold turban around her head to disguise the bandages. Looking glamorous, bohemian, and elated, she smiles goodbye to the camera and heads off to a fancy dress party. Trepanation, from the Greek word trepanon, meaning to bore, the creation of a hole in the skull, is the oldest known surgical procedure. Perforated crania up to 8,000 years old have been found in prehistoric sites all over the world. Some of the holes, made by scraping away the bone with a flint or obsidian knife until a piece could be prized out, are the size of a man's palm. Other skulls have been pierced several times like a sieve. The majority of these apertures have soft edges, indicating that they had begun to heal and that there was a high post-operative survival rate. Archaeologists have speculated that the operation was performed as a religious rite, an initiation into the priestly caste, or as a treatment for demonic possession, symptoms we might now diagnose as epilepsy, psychosis, or migraine. A hole in the head served as a mouthpiece to the gods, it was thought, or as a window that would allow bad spirits to escape. Hippocrates and Galen gave detailed and careful instructions as to how to best perform the operation, which was used widely by doctors in the 18th and 19th centuries as a treatment for insanity, melancholia, and headaches, and remained common right up to World War I. A variety of gruesome-looking devices evolved as surgeons sought to perfect a drilling tool. However, in the mid-1930s, when the Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz pioneered lobotomy, a procedure by which a deeper hole is drilled in the skull so that the prefrontal cortex of the brain could be mutilated using an instrument that resembled an apple core. Trepanation fell out of fashion and was relegated to the realm of superstition. The theory behind lobotomy was that you could destroy parts of the brain that caused psychotic delusions, and for his work, Moniz won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1949, by which time trepanation had become an almost extinct practice. In the course of the following decades, psychoactive drugs in turn began to supplant the even more brutal psychosurgery that had replaced it. Felding wasn't interested in performing the operation as an extreme form of body art, but because she believed it would have a life-changing effect on her. She hoped that a hole in her head would increase what she terms cranial compliance, that alleviating the pressure in her skull would allow the heart to pump more blood to her brain, thereby giving her a new feeling of buoyancy. If you don't have that expansibility, she says, of the prison of inflexible bone that most of us have for skulls, then the heartbeat pushes against the brain cells, which isn't very good. Felding tells me that she spent 4 years in the late 1960s trying to persuade a surgeon to trepan her. They all refused, reluctant to do such a procedure for its own sake without an indication. If God had wanted us to have a hole in our heads, they told her, he would have given us one. So she decided to do the operation herself. Not that I'm in favor of self-trepanation, she adds, because I think it's a ridiculous hoop for an untrained layperson to have to dive through, and quite dangerous, which is why I've only ever shown my film to small invited audiences. But at that point, it was the only way to see if trepanation actually makes a difference or not. Although Felding entertains all manner of ambiguity in relation to her operation, she feels it did have a beneficial impact. To my subjective experience, I thought at the time that it was rather like the tide coming in, she explains. I felt a natural peace. It felt like a return, like I was rising in myself to a more natural level. But obviously one can say that that was a placebo. One can never tell with such a subtle feeling. Felding first encountered the idea of trepanation at the age of 23, when she met an eccentric and handsome Dutchman named Bart Hughes, who was an advocate for the benefits of the procedure. She admits to having thought it a bit freak at first. Bart quite changed my viewpoint, Felding says, opening up doors of science and biology to me. He was very charismatic, we had a great love affair, and I was curious to see if what he said was true. Bart Hughes trepaned himself in 1965. The operation took 45 minutes, he later reported, but it took 4 hours to clean the blood off the walls and ceiling. 10 days later, at a public happening in Amsterdam's Dam Square, he removed his bandages, which consisted of 32 meters of gauze that he had painted with the words "ha ha ha ha" in psychedelic colors. When he visited a local hospital to obtain x-ray proof of his act, he was interrogated by psychiatrists, who suspected he was schizophrenic. He was held against his will whilst doctors performed 3 weeks' worth of psychological tests. They were forced to release him when these tests indicated he was completely sane. Those aren't very good tests. Hughes, who had been a medical student but never graduated, was one of the first promoters in Europe of the consciousness-expanding qualities of LSD. He believed that when mankind evolved to walk upright, our brains drained of the blood with which they had been previously saturated. The limited blood supply was now concentrated in the parts of the cerebral cortex that developed language and reason, but there was, he argued, an overall dulling of consciousness. Gravity, he liked to quip, brings you down. He used to stand on his head in an attempt to defeat it. Hughes came to believe that trepanation, by creating an opening akin to a baby's fontanelle, would allow the blood to freely pulse around the brain with every heartbeat, thereby creating a permanent high. In an 8-foot scroll articulating his ideas, Hughes declared that those with holes in their skulls would be representatives of the new species Homo sapiens erectus. Hughes's foremost disciple was a friend of Amanda Felding named Joseph Mellon. Mellon, who had been educated at Eton and Oxford before he tuned in and dropped out, met Hughes in the hedonistic party scene of 1960s Ibiza, where Hughes introduced him to LSD. He went on to describe himself as a sort of John the Baptist, and introduced Hughes to Felding in London in 1966. That summer, Felding helped Mellon drill a hole in his head, which served as a dress rehearsal of sorts for her own operation. Hughes had lent Mellon the money to buy an antique hand Trepan, even though he used an electric drill on himself in the hope that Mellon would be able to prove that anyone, even those who lived in the third world without access to electricity, would be able to enjoy the advantages of expanded consciousness. However, the centerpiece of the drill was so blunt that Mellon struggled for 2 hours to get it to the bone. A failure that was not perhaps helped by the fact that he'd steeled his nerves for the operation with LSD. He described his efforts in his unpublished memoir, Borehole, as like trying to uncork a bottle from the inside. The book reads something like an unintentional comedy of errors. Mellon phoned Hughes, who was in Amsterdam with Felding, and he agreed to return to England to help. However, Hughes was refused entry into the country. An interview he'd done before he left London had resulted in the unhelpful headline, "This dangerous idiot should be thrown out." And Felding aided Mellon in his place, using all her might to get to the point of the Trepan to hold so that the teeth of the drill could find a grip. Mellon, again high on acid, took over the drilling until he blacked out. Felding phoned for an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital. Felding and Mellon began seeing each other after she separated from Hughes. They would go on to marry and have 2 children together, yet Hughes's influence continued to dominate their lives. The following year, after Mellon had spent a week in jail for possession of cannabis, Felding assisted him with another attempted self-trepanation. "I found the groove from the previous operation and got going," Mellon wrote in his memoir. "After some time, there was an ominous-sounding slurp and the sound of bubbling. It sounded like air bubbles running under the skull as they were pressed out. However, when he examined the Trepan, it held an irregular sliver of bone, and when he didn't feel the expected difference in mood, he attributed this to having drilled through at an angle. The hole he had managed was evidently too small." 3 years later, Mellon armed himself with an electric drill and tried again. Once more, things did not go smoothly. This time, the drill burned out, and he had to bandage his head mid-operation and go downstairs to ask a handy neighbor to help him fix it. The repair took an hour. How the fuck did that conversation go? The next day, Mellon resumed the operation and finally achieved success. Steadily, almost imperceptibly, over the next 4 hours, I felt myself get higher and higher. I got higher than I had thought possible. I felt so light and free. It is very hard to put in words the feeling of change, but I felt very relaxed, as if everything would fall into place now. When Felding returned from New York a few days later after Mellon's successful trepanation, she was persuaded that he had undergone a change for the better. "The difference is very subtle," she explains. "Basically, I put it that the neurotic side of the person has a little less grip because they're higher. They have a little more bounce. The floor has been raised a bit. The balloon has been blown up a little bit more. It doesn't mean it cures the neurotic bag, but I do think it lessens it slightly." Several months later, she made up her mind to trepan herself, with Mellon on hand to film it. Learning from his mistakes, she performed what she describes as a faultless trepanation with a very neat scar. Felding became a leading propagandist for the benefits of trepanation. She stood for Parliament as an independent candidate in her local constituency of Chelsea in 1979 and 1983, campaigning on the sole platform that trepanation should be freely available on the National Health Service, doubling her share of the vote from 49 to 139 in the process. One journalist at the time asked whether these were gestures of support or protest, a way of saying that the country needed Mrs. Thatcher about as much as it needed a hole in the head. Felding and Mellon separated after 28 years together. Both of them persuaded their subsequent partners to be trepaned. In 1995, Felding married Lord Needpath, a former professor at Oxford who taught international relations to Bill Clinton. He found that the terrible headaches he'd suffered from all his life ceased after trepanation. Felding is still a supporter of the procedure and has started up the Beckley Foundation to commission research into the possible benefits of trepanation. The foundation has also obtained permission to conduct the first study in 30 years of the effects of LSD on human subjects. It will test the neural changes brought about by the drug. She has funded the investigations of a scientist in St. Petersburg, Yuri Moskalenko, who is a pioneer in the field of cerebral circulation and has performed a battery of neurological tests on patients who have had their skulls opened in order to have cancerous brain tumors removed. Felding believes his findings provide incontrovertible evidence that trepanation does bring about real neurophysiological changes. Whether those changes are beneficial or not remains an open question. Even within the tight-knit circle of Hughes's disciples, not everyone has been so convinced. Hughes's own sister reported that trepanation had no effect on her at all. Felding estimates there are perhaps several dozen people alive today who have been trepanned. I ask her whether she envisages a utopia in which one day we all have holes in our heads and access to a higher plane. On the whole, people remain just as disappointing, untrepanned, or trepanned. Felding laughs. Just because someone is trepanned, it doesn't mean that you like them anymore. In the year 2000, Felding traveled to Mexico City to have a second hole drilled in her head because she felt the one she made in 1970 with a dentist's drill had closed up. The surgeon, who she found after many closer to home, refused, once again, to help her perform the operation with a hand-cranked trepan. I would choose myself trepanation any day, Felding says of his clumsy job. But I felt incredibly well after having it. Pleased to be me. But obviously a subjective difference is not enough to convince anyone. If it is a placebo effect, I'd love to know, she says, open to doubt. Then one can just draw a line under that subject and see it as a kind of cultural artwork. I still have a burning ambition to discover what the truth is, but from my own experience I think there is a change. Otherwise I wouldn't be bothering about it 40 years later. So there you go, everyone. She basically says that, well, this doesn't do society any good, but I feel better doing it. It makes me feel great. Notice that all of the people who influenced her were degenerate drug addicts who wanted to have a permanent high. They wanted to feel good all of the time. They want to feel good so desperately on a constant basis that they are willing to put holes in their head to do it, to achieve this. Obviously, I'm boiling this down to very simple things, but it's there. There's nothing really to analyze. There's no underlying psychology other than pleasure-seeking here. And they admit it. Maybe not in such direct terms, but they admit it. I see putting a hole through your head in an attempt to create a permanent high for yourself is no different than a lot of what is happening in Western culture right now. Now, obviously, it's not as sensational and immediate as putting a hole in your skull to expose your brain. I think I would rather watch an art student put a hole through her head than kids whining on Vine about how their parents don't recognize their gender identity because they so desperately want to be gay. I will never understand it. You know what? Yeah, why not? We've normalized that in however many years. Why can't we normalize putting a hole through your head? It has about the same measurable effects with regards to health. Dump paused loads in me. Can't eat Chipotle, got a bottom tonight. Put a hole in my skull. It's all the same shit. And I need to talk about something that I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this episode, and that is the idea of slave morality. A lot of people criticize Christianity as having a slave morality, and what they use to cite this is Jesus telling people to turn the other cheek if they are hit in the cheek. If this is an example of slave morality, look at who the slaves are. They are people who have no concept of righteousness or proper retribution. So something as petty as a slap in the face could easily escalate when it should be left to that. Because look at the people Jesus was talking to. Angry, bitter sand people who had no concept, have no concept. of righteous violence. This is not to say that self-defense is immoral. This is saying that getting slapped in the face, it's not a situation worth letting spiral out of control. Jesus was a pretty smart guy. I think he understands that most people are 95 IQ, don't understand basic input-output relationships. You can't let the slaves make their own decisions, because they don't know how to. They don't know how to make their own decisions. And you have a country full of slaves making their own decisions. And this is not some sly reference regarding black people. I'm talking about most people. Look at these smarter slaves. Even they can't make their own decisions, as we talked about earlier. The ones with a bit more IQ to spare, they drill holes in their skulls. But again, what do I know? I think that people should have unequal relationships because, people learn so much by being exactly equal to everybody else. Yeah, I need to talk about this. I was at a junk store last week and I was looking through their books, and it was like this weird hippie book written by this, baby boomer chick, and it was like a book about like what to do without school. And it was actually the page that I opened, it was by complete chance. It said that you should have unequal relationships. You should strive to have unequal relationships. This person is probably more left-leaning than right-leaning. And they're acknowledging that some people are better than others. Some people have more experience, more know-how. And that you need to rely on these mentor relationships if you want to know anything useful. If you want to know anything about the real world. But no, let's all call ourselves egalitarians because equality is totally fulfilling. Like I said, what do I know? Hierarchy is evil and oppressive, and for patriarchs. Anyway, this comes from our friend Anti-Dem over at the Anti-Dem blog, antidem.wordpress.com. Just wanted to send this to you to get your reaction. It's been pretty amusing watching SJW responses to tonight's episode of Game of Thrones, and that episode aired last week because this email was sent to me 7 days ago as of this recording. So anyway, the email goes on. My favorite is the one who apparently doesn't know that if something bad happens to a gay character on a TV show, that doesn't mean it's because the writers have a homophobic agenda. Thanks for the great show. Well, let's take a look at this screenshot that's attached here. And we're going to find out if it's a nasty virus, and it is not. Anyway, it's a series of tweets, a screenshot that was a part of the attachment in the email. I'm already sent abuse from Game of Thrones fan doubling as rape apologist, saying I should cancel my HBO if I'm so bothered. Hashtag rape is not okay. At HBO, disgusting and gratuitous sexual violence even for Game of Thrones standards. No excuse for that scene, and it's not even in the book. And 2 more tweets here. I hope there's no season 6 of Game of Thrones. HBO writers ruined a great show in season 5 with their homophobic agenda. It hashtag jumped the shark. Oh, homophobic was also hashtagged. And then more. One more. Someday, D&D will learn rape is not a plot tool. Today is not that day. These people, despite the fact that they claim that they're equal and they're empowered and they're smart and they're just as good as you, are triggered by television because they consume far too much of it. My friend brought this up with regard to that Bella and the Bulldogs thing. And this was in response to some sex clickbait website complaining about the fact that quote-unquote white supremacists were pointing out the fact that this show is basically cuckold porn without the porn part. And they're saying that, oh, these racists, they're so sad, they're looking far too much into anything. And the only reason that this got brought to my attention was because they linked to my video that I did on it. And I didn't offer any opinion, I just found a screenshot somebody made and found some copy and pasted thing that somebody made and just read it. That's all I did. But yeah, they're of course complaining about internet racists. Not acknowledging the fact that a show intended for children has references, very overt references, to pornography. But anyway, my friend said that we're pathetic for pointing this out, yet these people are the same people that complain that too many Disney princesses are white, and that cartoons contribute to the patriarchy. These people only want things to mean something when it reflects positively on them. And despite what they say, despite the fact that whenever somebody who isn't left-wing points out these themes in mass media, they say, oh, it's just a show, it doesn't matter yet. They build so much of their identity around the media they consume, which is why they always bitch about heteronormativity and patriarchy, and this show needs to be more feminist, even though, from what I hear, the television industry employs mostly women. Every stupid idea, every stupid sociology, anthropology 101 class ideal that you see written into a television show is there because a woman put it there. Or by a man who probably is saving up money to become a woman. Because, you know, growing a uterus is totally something that you can do. Yeah, there's another great contradiction there. The feminists will say, back off my uterus, back off my uterus. While saying that women are more than just their body parts, you know. But what can I reasonably expect from people who define so much of their existence based on the stuff they put in front of their eyeballs? Can't wait for the day when the WWE starts letting these kinds of people write angles for them. Alright, next up. I am 15 as of right now, almost 16, and began working in an official work environment legally with taxes and whatnot starting at 14 years old. I've been working at the same shop this entire time, almost a year and a half now, and have improved a lot. It is a bike shop, and I am a mechanic now, where I started off wiping the front door and counters and cleaning the bathroom, unboxing bikes, etc. Now I am a full-blown mechanic through watching and having brief lessons with no real training time. I've repetitively asked the general manager, service manager, and so on for official training, and right now I'm about maybe 65% as effective, and many of the workers said I deserve a raise in training days. I make minimum wage, $7.20 after taxes, and the rest make about $16 to $22. And I feel as if I'm being used. This shop has given me so many new opportunities in life and brought me out of the poverty that my family lives in. They are career welfare type of people, and I never wanted to end up like that and feel loyal to my job and the friends I have made. After that backstory, that was probably worthless, my question would be, should I find a new job? How should I handle trying to receive a raise I was promised 6 months ago, and so on and so forth? I'm at a loss and at the end of my knowledge, and any family couldn't tell me, and I feel like their advice would be tainted anyways. Speaking to coworkers about it would make me look bad, and none of my friends have ever had formal work. Sorry for the length. Okay, no problem. Even though you've been working for a really long time with these people, you're still really young, and that could be a factor in why they haven't given you a raise yet. Now, if the people around you are your same age and they're making more than twice what you're making, that's a problem. I mean, whether this is right or wrong, you're really young and they're paying you accordingly, because you might not be a flake, but it's still probably in the back of their minds that, 15, 16-year-olds, they're not exactly the most reliable of people. I don't know what the job market is like for 15 to 16-year-olds, but I imagine it's pretty hard to get a job being the age you are, so with that in mind, I would tough it out a little while longer and see if things improve at all. Alright, next question from Han. I apologize for all the questions, but after listening to episode 40, that one was great, by the way. Can't wait for the Horsefucker Uprising along with up-and-coming Beta Uprising. I'm confused by what you mean by status signaling. If you could elaborate on what that means exactly, that would be wonderful. Your episodes really give me the drive to write anti-degenerate stories, so keep on doing what you do. You help me more than you could ever know. Well, I'm glad that I could provide some inspiration for you. The easiest way to imagine what status signaling is basically whatever will get people a lot of likes on Facebook. I'm sure you're familiar with that image that says, "I might lose a lot of friends for this, but I support gay rights." They know full well they won't lose friends over it. The millennials' favorite cause is whatever the fuck gay rights are. And in a more general sense, just this idea of equality. The idea of equality is what signals to people that, oh look, I'm a good person. Heap the praises on me. Look how good of a goyim I am. That's what status signaling is. Good goy points. Good goys showing off for other good goys. Good goys impressing other good goys with how many stupid, dumb, acceptable opinions you can have at one time. I'm pretty sure that all people retain from college is showing people, taking any opportunity to show people how not racist or not homophobic you are, how not sexist you are, how not misogynistic you are, how not ableist you are, how not sizist you are. People will do the stupidest shit for a pat on the head, and it makes me sick. So, thank you for the email, and we'll go to the next one. From mine, who wants to know what my beef is with Patriarchy Comics. This isn't the question. He says, I don't mind them. They're very much a typical leftist anti-SJW type, but I don't mind them that much. I have a little laugh at their stuff every now and then. Yeah, I don't know why I singled them out specifically, because it's like an original, constantly original piece of work, and I don't know, I just saw something of theirs recently that just rubbed me the wrong way, and then, I don't know, just compounded with my current mood. It made me say things that I probably shouldn't have said. But anyway, the questions. I was listening to The Daily Show. I just started listening regularly in the last few weeks, and they had their Chateau Autiste part about why meme culture, particularly in the ironic meme shitposting community, is predominantly leaning to the right. Why do you think it is that those who are in the meme game have very conservative views? That's a good question, actually. I don't prefer to call it ironic meme pages, and a lot of people listening now are going to be like, what the fuck? Just go look up my page, Full House Memes 2. That's what I did first. That's how I got popular initially. I personally always thought of it as alternative humor, and I think all of us who are involved in it were heavily inspired by autistic humor, who I think is the grandfather of all of these funny Facebook pages you see now, these ironic meme pages. I don't like that term, but again, I'll use it. I don't know if this applies to everyone else, but I just got sick of leftists thinking that they're funny. I got sick of liberals thinking they're funny and thinking that they're anti-establishment when they aren't funny, and they are the establishment. I got sick of people making, stupid jokes about how Christians are dumb and atheists are smarter, and how, oh, I fucking love science. I hate all that shit. I hated all that shit, which is why I wanted to create something counter to it. I got sick of these people having a monopoly on this corner of the internet because I was there often, it popped up often. Normal person Facebook is a terrifying thing, by the way, but I'm sure you're already all familiar with that. I got fed up with people bitching about whatever ism or phobia you could possibly think of. Even though I got into this particular world before the George Zimmerman trial, I think that the tides really turned around that time, because it showed that people who weren't afraid to break these taboos about race, people who weren't afraid to question the narrative, that they showed themselves to be way funnier than the opposition. It's not funny to be safe, and what the left mostly does is act like they have the monopoly on comedy, when in reality, their greatest trick is convincing people that they're the underdogs, rather than the ones that are in charge, when they are in charge. Hate speech will be a crime in America in our lifetime. I am almost certain of this. It's a prediction, I know, and it could be proven wrong, but somebody sent me on Twitter that 41% of Americans support putting hate speech laws into place. And it's no coincidence that most of these hateful opinions are ones opposite of the cultural, political left. And mine's other question, if you had to live in any non-white country, anywhere except UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and some European nations, where would it be and why? Argentina. Argentina es no blanco. But I guess they are honorary white given that Hitler died there. Alright, next from... Okay, I'll just read it first. I've been listening to your show for a few weeks, and while I agree with many of your viewpoints, there are a couple of positions that I'd like to question you on. First of all, I believe you are overestimating the influence of SJWs and the LGBT agenda. I live in a liberal university town, and I know only a few people who subscribe to the blend of radfem/intersectional feminism seen on Tumblr, and they are almost universally ridiculed. Sure, there are plenty of feminists on campus who complain about slut-shaming the wage gap and all of the usual drivel, but very few endorse trans/pan, genderqueer, polyamory, whatever. Also heard you talk about how LGBT is endorsed in schools, and LGBT support groups become an easy way to find belonging. As somebody who just graduated from an American high school, I can tell you that this is a flawed perspective. While LGBT and pro-LGBT students were allowed to form a group at my school, so were Christians, anti-drug students, and others with conservative perspectives. For the most part, all clubs stayed in their own sphere and didn't try to recruit. I would hardly say that being a member of the Gay-Straight Alliance was considered cool, any more than belonging to a Christian club. They were just there. Which brings me to my main point. The SJW, to my mind, is a boogeyman for MRAs, MGTOWs, and right libertarians, and other groups opposed to the far left. Something to point to and say, look, this is what libtards actually believe. The right uses these people in much the same way the left uses evangelical Christians. Someone like Becky Fisher may not represent the agenda of most conservative Christians, but leftists will certainly paint her as an example of how religion will brainwash your kids. I would be a lot more concerned by radical feminism to believe in the slippery slope. If you gave an example of how these people have effective legislative change, or at least societal change that goes beyond convincing a few teenage girls that they're gender fluid because they like wearing boy clothes some days. Please point to me any episodes where you address any legislative or social change brought about by this latest brand of hyper-egalitarianism, so I admit I haven't delved too far back into your catalog. Finally, I'd like to ask you about a topic brought up in the normie question, if I remember correctly. You were talking about how trans people aren't beneficial to society because they don't fulfill the gender roles which their desired sex use to actually help their society, i.e. trans women don't want to become mothers, trans men don't enlist in the army. But where do these assumptions come from? Most cis, ugh, that term, yeah. Men and women don't perform their gender in a constructive way. Plenty of cis men are weak-willed pussies, and plenty of cis women abandon responsibility. If, say, a trans man were to defend his country and focus on being a good father for an adopted child, would you still disapprove of his decision to become, at least cosmetically, male? Well, it's turned out to be rather long. Okay, that's fine. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to men and women being weak-willed and ditching the motherly responsibilities. And I've recorded plenty of proof on this show, not even my opinions. Just reading ExoJane or Reddit or hashtags on Tumblr. There are no groups of people that escape my wrath. This channel is called Common Filth after all. I do not like the common person very much. I do not like what the common person has become. I just think that some groups of people are objectively more dysfunctional than others. So beginning with a point you made earlier in this email, I'll read it again. I've heard you talk about how LGBT is endorsed in schools and LGBT support groups become an easy way to find belonging. And you think that's a flawed perspective because you say these groups stay to themselves usually. Let me put it like this. Do you sincerely think that your group would allow an anti-LGBT group? Do you think it would allow a white student union group? Would you ever hear from your teachers that trans people commit suicide at a disturbingly high rate. And the reason for that probably isn't transphobia, given that they don't live by the standards of cisgendered society. Would you ever hear from any of your teachers that lesbian couples beat the shit out of each other way more than straight couples beat the shit out of each other? And that is fact. That's not an opinion. Per the University of Missouri at St. Louis, about 17 to 45% of lesbians report having been the victim of at least one act of physical violence perpetrated by a lesbian partner. Types of physical abuse named by more than 10% of participants in one study included disrupting others' eating or sleeping habits, pushing or shoving, driving recklessly to punish and slapping, kicking, hitting, or biting. Sexual abuse by a woman partner has been reported by up to 50% of lesbians. Psychological abuse has been reported as occurring at least one time by 24 to 90% of lesbians. There are more teachers that would give you a poor grade for including this research in your paper than there are teachers who would give you a positive grade for including this in your paper. You don't need legislation because school district employees are already doing the legwork that legislation would accomplish. You don't need to make it written law in order to have an impact on the culture. And culture is downstream from education. It's not the other way around. The impressionable minds are filtered through the educational environment, and they impact the culture. They get good grades, they think they're right, they think they're objectively right, so they keep those opinions. But if you need an example of a piece of legislation, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, signed into law that children must learn about LGBT history. Schools must teach it. And your main point, the SJW, I'll quote your email again. The SJW, to my mind, is a boogeyman for MRAs, MGTOWs, right libertarians, and other groups opposed to the far left. Something to point to and say, look, this is what libtards actually believe. To an extent, you're correct. Most people aren't as extreme in behavior as social justice warriors are. Which, by the way, I don't like that term. I've said that before, but if you haven't heard me say that, you've heard me say it now. I do agree to some extent that the most extreme SJWs are a vocal minority, and they are a small minority. But I think it's useful to look at what this very vocal minority believes and look at the commonalities that more mainstream people have with them, the ideas they have. And just like SJWs, your mainstream liberal believes that each behavior is just as valid as the next. They believe that the nastiest of human impulses are fundamentally good, and that it's some great sin to want to alter them or redirect them. Every whim should be indulged, unless, of course, it's harming somebody. Because liberals and SJWs have an oversensitivity to harm. They don't care about loyalty, they don't care about dignity. All they care about is who is hurt, who's getting hurt. They're like your mom. Don't do that, you'll get hurt. Don't hurt anybody's feelings, that's hate speech. And this part of your email where you say, I would be a lot more concerned by radical feminism if you gave examples of how these people have effective legislative change, or at least societal change that goes beyond convincing a few teenage girls that they're gender fluid because they like wearing boy clothes some days. Well, here's your societal change. Single motherhood. Most inmates in America are from single mother households. Those who belong to single mother households are more prone to be criminals. Go watch a few Tommy Sotomayor videos, and you can see exactly how this applies to black people. Feminists would say, women don't need a husband. They don't need a father for their children in their life. They can do it all. They're perfectly capable of raising children on their own. And the state goes along with this, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Custody is awarded in custody battles to the woman more often than not. Your average liberal Your average SJW, they think this is great because girl power. They think that historical injustices are being corrected, despite the fact that the essence of civilization is protecting eggs over sperm. And the end of your email here that says, if, say, a trans man were to defend his country and focus on being a good father for an adopted child, would you still disapprove of his decision to become at least cosmetically male? Yes. Like I said earlier, these people kill themselves at a higher rate than the general population. People who are more likely to kill themselves are not mentally hinged. And this completely ignores the fact that they want to render themselves into sterile eunuchs so they could become who they are. That in and of itself is a huge red flag. Also, how many trans men sign up for selective service? How many of them join infantry? Most of them join the military because they want an easy government job. And that's really all the military is outside of the combat units. It's the fucking DMV. Next question from Harzer. I love your videos, great stuff. However, at the end of episode 39, you played some great Vaporwave. Do you have a link to that? I can't seem to find it. Thank you for your time. Go look at my list of videos, and the title of the video is Contrast 03, Mahogany Floor, and some other stuff I can't remember. Yeah, I made it from some obscure jazzy kind of CD I found at a dollar store a long time ago. The next email from Nameless Narrator. Hello, CF. After hearing about the gift documentary of the sick bug chasers on your show in the past months, I finally watched it. I wasn't surprised at all with the documentary. I tell you, I was sick to my stomach, but wasn't much surprised about the behavior of these degenerates. This is the reason why I fully oppose the LGBT, WTF, BBQ, FAG community and want nothing to do with them. I prefer to go the route that Jack Donovan and Ophelia Manifesto has taken and not become a product of this community. I have reason to believe that just as modernity has taken hold of our society in the way it's going, that the fag community was the experiment of the 68er generation's agenda to turn the values of the greatest generation upside down. The Frankfurt School's legacy is deeply ingrained in the community, and just as based Tyrone says, we're going to need a bigger oven. I fully support the show and wish you luck. Thank you for the email. The reason why I tell people to watch this documentary is because this is what happens when you place sexual identity and sexual behavior at the forefront of your existence. Because as extreme as it may be, but something like bug chasing could not exist independent of a gay identity. And that's all I will say at this point, because it's basically summer right now, and as we know, that's all we'll fucking hear about in the news from now until August. I have plenty of emails left to answer, but I think I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to go to Ask FM and pick up the emails next week. I'm not sure you've talked about this before, but I'm a fairly new listener, so I wouldn't know. Anyway, what's your opinion on masturbation and porn? Well, that's 2 weeks in a row that I have received questions about masturbation. Look, as we know, the pornography industry, it was created with the intention of destroying WASP culture. And that's a fact. The guy who is basically the architect of the porn industry, a Jewish guy, says, I want to destroy WASP culture. I want to cause its decay. And I think he was successful. I think that porn isn't the sole catalyst of it, but it's among many of the catalysts. Limit yourself as often as you can. I'm not going to go into deep detail about masturbation and porn. You shouldn't consume or do these things. And that's all there really is to say about it. I cannot provide any insight. Next question. How did you become such a manly man? I never considered myself the most masculine of men. But if there's one piece of advice that I would give, it's don't worry about minor things. Don't let minor annoyances cause you to express anger. I think that having a mastery over your emotions is something that is very useful for a man to learn. And I know that's not the whole of what makes a man, but the men I respect the most, they have this character trait. They only care about what truly matters. There were plenty of times in my life where I cared and got worked up over things that really did not matter much in the end. And it's taken a lot of self-examination to repair certain aspects of my personality that I came to dislike. And don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to become more conservative. Once upon a time, I was probably sympathetic to the pervert libertine lifestyle, even though I never engaged in it myself. It took a long time for me to realize that being a pervert libertine is not what makes the world work. Like the Ultimate Warrior said in that speech, queering does not make the world work. Anyway, next. I remember someone asking about Free the Nipple, but I don't remember if you've given your thoughts on women breastfeeding their children in public. I think Free the Nipple and women breastfeeding their children in public are different things, because if you look up the Free the Nipple hashtag, it was the first track on Tumblr Easter's Raw Volume 2 where I dealt with Free the Nipple. And all the girls in that, well, not all of them, but a majority of them, a comfortable majority of these girls, they all had pierced nipples. They all had mutilated boobs. They want to free the nipples so that people can pat them on the head and say, yes, that's nice. You are so damaged that you put sharp pieces of metal through your nipple. One of them had tattooed nipples. Tattooed boobs around the areolas. Absolutely disgusting. But women breastfeeding their children in public, I don't really care, as long as they're not making a fool of themselves and their child by leaving their breast exposed for everybody to see. I mean, okay, you're fine, you're not ashamed of it, but think about your child. What if your child grows up and finds out that mommy breastfed in public without covering herself up? Everybody's so goddamn self-centered. In one of your previous videos, you mentioned Red Letter Media and how they are too left side with their content. And it shows, because their video about the new Star Wars, they completely missed the point about people criticizing the black guy being the main protagonist. Of course they missed the point. They're morons. I'm not some big Star Wars fan myself. I have no real emotional attachment to the franchise. And I'm not entirely sure why people were criticizing the protagonist being who he is, but it's Star Wars. The movie doesn't take place in America, doesn't take place in Brazil, doesn't take place even in Africa. So this guy's blackness will add nothing to the character other than him being a token. It will add nothing meaningful to the character. And this is just knowing the nature of Hollywood. But we all know Hollywood lies. They do not portray anything honestly. Though, when Spike Lee was making movies about how much he hated Italians, I think that was pretty honest. But there's a significant overlap because Jews hate Italians too. But when Red Letter Media annoyed me the most was when they did the review for Pain and Gain a couple of years ago. How they're saying that how dare Michael Bay take this real life event and make a comedy movie out of it. And all I could think of was, hey, wait a minute. How many dead prostitute jokes did you make in the Mr. Plinkett reviews of the Star Wars trilogy? But hey, you can cross any line as long as that line isn't crossing homophobia or racism. Fucking morons. Alright, next. Where's my tab? There's my tab. Hey, Common Filth, do you have any blood relation to Bob Saget? Is this a subtle "are you a Jew" question? Because while I have not bought a 23andMe kit yet, there's nobody in my family in recent memory that has been any percentage of Jewish as far as my knowledge goes. Hey CF, I'm a relatively new fan, so I'm not sure if this has been asked before, but I was wondering what kind of music you're into. I also listened to that album on your old Bandcamp and thought it was really good. Are you planning on making any more music? Thanks in advance. Well, thank you for giving that a listen. It is the only music that I've ever released publicly, but I have played guitar for 10 years now, and I played drums as well. I've been playing drums for about 5 years. There was a time where I really was into music. I would play every day, and it's what I wanted to do with my life until I realized the kind of people I would have to associate with in order to have at least a minor career in playing music, and I just lost my passion for it at this point. So I wouldn't discourage anybody from learning an instrument, but looking back, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have done something more fruitful with my time. As for what music I like to listen to, I like power pop, I like punk, and more recently I just go through different tags on Bandcamp and look for music made by kids in their bedroom, and I think that's a lot more interesting. The music is a lot more interesting than whatever's making money nowadays. Next was Brevik Wright. On some things, I'm sure. I have to refresh my memory, reading his manifesto and stuff. Keep up the good work, and you keep doing what you do. If Richard Spencer asked you to speak at a National Policy Institute conference, would you accept the invite? Yeah, I would. I think that would be a great opportunity. Ever thought of attending an Ameren conference? At some point in the future, I would like to go to one. I feel like I have to be a little bit older in order for... I know that Ramsey Paul had a few younger people in his videos when he was at the conference talking to some younger people, but it would be nice to rub elbows with those people, but I just think at this point I wouldn't have much to offer by attending it. Next question. If there was a Traditionalist Youth Network chapter in your area, would you join? No, and I say no because it's not like I have anything against the people who would join such an organization. It's just I feel more comfortable as a free agent, for lack of a better word. It's just where I felt most comfortable. It's where I feel like I do my best work. Thoughts on Jack Donovan? I think he's a good writer. I think he's a very good writer. And he has a lot to say that I agree with. I enjoy pretty much every one of his articles that I've ever read of his. Okay, this next one is a two-parter. Thanks for carrying the torch and being a rallying point for us. It is people like you who will slowly but surely make a difference. I am an iron-pilled IT professional with strong traditional values. I've been with my fair maiden since we were 17, 24 now. We have bought a house and will eventually start a family. I feel like even if we are both perfect parents, society still has a good chance of turning our children into liberal degenerates. Is there any hope for raising proper children? If so, what is the true path? Thanks again. If you want to have children, because I've thought about this a lot, like how would you raise children that would not be poisoned by the various toxins of modernity? There are no solutions that are guaranteed to protect your children from becoming something you don't want them to become. There's no silver bullet solution. The best way to help your children along into becoming something that you consider decent is to have a strong network of like-minded people in your extended family and in your social life. If you do have extended family and they're of a similar mindset as you, if they're of a same approach to life or a similar approach to life as you, then that's fine. Get them socialized with these people. If your friends are similar to you and if they have children, and if they're also of a similar approach to life, get your children socialized around those people. If you don't have an extended family or a social circle who are of morals that you approve of, or if your lady doesn't have an extended family that has good morals that you approve of, then it would be very difficult for you to keep your children on the right path on your own. The nuclear family, I think, cannot maintain a civilization on its own. I think that a good, strong, moral, extended family needs to be part of the equation. All right, next up from Dante from the Right Video blog. Hey, Common Filth, are you interested in maybe some cuddling and Sonic 3 later? I know what you are referencing, but I don't think a lot of other people might know. I talked about it a little bit last week, but I do not want to touch the subject anyway. Under the Obama administration, U.S. forces are mostly gone from the Middle East, and Arab Muslims are killing each other in droves. Isn't this a great success? I really couldn't say. I'm not a foreign policy expert. Hey CF, what are your thoughts on Brother Dean, the street preacher at University of Arizona? Do you think he's just hateful by the way he preaches, or do you think he gives the people the hard truth of themselves they don't want to hear? What are your thoughts on street preachers in general? Thanks. I think that street preachers have some pretty enormous testicles to do what they do, given that the average person bases their lives around orgasms and non-judgment because they know that their actions are worthy of judging. But Brother Dean in particular, I'm familiar with a little bit, and I watched that Vice documentary about him, and there was one part of it where this girl was harassing him. She's like, isn't it against Christianity to be hateful? And he's just saying, like, no and stuff, and, you know, she's trying to plead with him on a moral basis, and then she gets really vulgar and says, well, you just need to get your dick sucked, which really goes to show you that women are not the fair maidens we'd like them to be. And people might say that Brother Dean is vulgar and that he's saying that you deserve to be raped and all this, but the average person is not really capable of nuance. So they like loud music, they like fast cars, they like loose women. And saying something explosive as you deserve to be raped, that's what gets their attention. People don't like the idea that they might deserve something bad that happens to them, but it's not a dishonest view to have that some people are deserving of the ills that plague them. And people who aren't repentant of anything are deserving of illness and pain. There's this music video, Take Me to Church by Hosier. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The video shows the supposedly atrocities Christianity does to homosexuals nowadays, which in reality is what Muslims do. But of course, this is a progressive video that replaced Muslim for Christianity. I think it's a product of people living in very safe, overly sensitive times where people have been safe for so long, so they have developed a sensitivity to everything. They have expected that they should be in comfort all the time. And people having a negative opinion towards what they've decided to base their lives around that's like the worst thing you could possibly do. So they think that that is a form of violence, simply having a negative opinion towards, in this case, sodomy. And what a display of guilty conscience that all these, they interpret people, certain people, a small segment of the population, and it is a small segment, who has a negative opinion. They have such a guilty conscience that they think that a negative opinion will lead to something further, when generally it does not. The middle class, like I said, is very ineffective in matters of violence. Money and credit are the great pacifiers of our time. Hey CF, hope your breathing therapy is working out for you. Well, it's nothing official, it's good to take deep breaths sometimes. That's all it is. I'll probably do the same since feminism, ideology, and SJWs are slowly spreading to Mexico. Now to the question, why do progressives support Muslims? Their religion is exactly what they are against, so why can't they see that? Well, basically, like I said last week, liberalism boils down to fuck you, dad. And who is dad generally in America? It's usually Christian dads, church-going dads, hardworking dads, providing for your family dads. So of course they're supporting anything that goes against that, even if it might seem like a contradiction given what they believe. It's just their inclinations, the liberals' natural inclination. They like novelty, they do not like tradition. They hate themselves, therefore they hate their families. So, that's all I can really say. But thank you for the question. Hi, Common Filth. Huge fan as of recently. I was wondering, do you have any advice on how to start up a YouTube channel for fascist gamers? I realize the authoritarian right wing needs to get its presence into society, and I want to do my part in spreading our ideals. I would actually, are you familiar with HP Gaming on Facebook? If you're the admin of that, I'm a big fan because the guy who runs that is a National Socialist, and that page is really funny. It's one of my favorites. I can't say how to break into the YouTube gamer market because I'm not a part of that, but it seems pretty saturated, so I'm not quite sure how you would go about it, but every YouTube game Let's Player that I come across is a fucking spaz, so, and that's probably because their audience is made up of 13-year-olds predominantly. So I don't have any specific advice other than don't put yourself off as a spaz because I personally dislike that. That's not something I'd be interested in, but on a more general basis, make yourself adhere to a schedule, whether it's once a week or twice a month, once every 2 weeks, once every month, whatever it is. I would recommend between 2 and 4 uploads a month. And that's not necessarily for your potential audience, even though being on a schedule helps. It's more for you, because it will help you develop the discipline and good habits in order to be consistent, because I think consistency is a very important thing when it comes to putting out entertainment. And it's important even if it's not entertainment. But above all else, you just have to force yourself to produce things. You have to have an output, because when you start, you're not going to have an audience built in. I mean, you can show it to your friends and stuff, and it spreads from there, but you have to have something available in order for people to be fans of it. So once you start making stuff, whenever you decide to start making stuff, just let me know. Follow me on Twitter, let me know what's going on, and I'll check in on it. I do follow back on Twitter, and that goes for everyone, even if you don't feel like being a public figure. Next, hey Common Filth, what do you think of Jim/Internet Aristocrat /Mr. Meadowker? Seems like a cool enough guy/funny, but he is also a massive degenerate. I think I subscribed to his newest channel, and I think he did comment on the Vine Marathon, one of the Vine Marathons that I made, and I don't keep up with him as often as I do other things, but everything I've seen from him I've liked okay. I don't know about his degeneracy. Somebody's going to have to fill me in on that. The oldlightblog.wordpress.com. Intolerance, a bedrock of society. Alright, let's give this a read. We know that the bedrock of society is the family, one man, one woman, and their offspring. I submit to you that there are indeed other societal bedrocks, namely religion, zeitgeist, and intolerance. Yes, intolerance is one of the bedrocks of society. It is the stone wall that keeps out wild beasts, enemies, and allows the people to sleep a little more peacefully at night. The left has ground the family into dust through easy divorce, liberal media brainwashing of the youth to destroy morals, and homosexual marriage as a coup de grace of sorts. They want to destroy the other bedrocks of society, and intolerance, our premonition to preserve ourselves against civilization-destroying elements, is obviously in their crosshairs. I am proudly intolerant. I do not tolerate homosexuality, transgenderism, hatred for the European people, or hostile pagan religions such as Judaism. I believe they have no place in a civilized world, and that those who practice such things should be shunned or worse, or perhaps sent to the nunnery to take care of their mental problems in the case of transgendered. It is this intolerance of evil that keeps society together. Once we start tolerating evil, and America as a whole certainly is, it's game over. I believe it's game over for America, but a new Pax Romana of sorts is in the future, after a period of suffering. But it does not have to be game over for us as individuals or as a group. We need to keep our personal stone walls strong and refuse to tear them down to appease the horde. This can be very hard, especially as it can affect your career negatively. I would never go brandishing the fact that I think homosexual behavior should be completely illegal, or that I am against non-European immigration, but I also won't completely hide them. I think I'm not going to read all of this, but I think I'm going to stop there because I think this brings up a really good point that I was going to address on some episode in the future. That I think this idea that free speech is not consequence free speech is a horrible idea. Because I think it's the same thing as, let me put it to you this way. Are you of the opinion, if you are of this opinion, that people should be fired for voting for the wrong things? The things that are deemed wrong by somebody's employer? Speech in a democratic culture is the same thing as a vote. Except you're not dealing with legislation or people who will write legislation or people who will supposedly act in your interest. Speech is not voting upon these things, but speech is voting upon what kind of behavior you would like to see out of people. People with whom you have some relatively direct contact. And it's the same idea with purchasing. You are voting with your dollar what you would like to see continue being produced. You are reflecting your demand in the marketplace by purchasing something, or imposing your demand, rather. So being fired if you have opinions about certain things is the same thing as being fired for voting a certain way or buying certain products. Now, I get it. Certain forms of water cooler talk can be damaging towards the bottom line when all a company is really interested in is making money. I mean, they might be interested in some other things, but if they didn't have money, they wouldn't be able to exist. That's their priority. But if an employee is caught expressing some sort of opinion, some sort of unsavory opinion when they're not on the clock, that doesn't affect the bottom line. That doesn't concern them. At least it shouldn't concern them, but yeah, corporations are replacing nation states, and every corporation, I tweeted this, is full of dildos and HIV positive sperm. Next, I saw the clip you posted from the film The Gift on your Facebook page. When I read about what the film was about and what they were promoting, I nearly got sick. Not in a hyperbolic sense. I had to take a moment to stop myself from passing out. Why do these people do this? Why do they want HIV? Like I said earlier, the gay identity, it makes possible this bug chasing thing. This could not exist independent of a lifestyle that places sexual activity as the highest moral good, as what you should spend the majority of your free time pursuing. And it serves no biological purpose other than, oh, it feels good. We know where wanting to feel good all the time leads us. It leads us to drilling holes in our heads, and it leads us to wanting HIV so that we don't have to worry about it anymore. So you'd have all this sex, this butt sex, free of any consequence. I mean, some mainstream queer outlets will say bug chasing is an urban legend, but 60% of people living with HIV are homosexuals. Gay and bisexual men who have sex with men. But you can't acknowledge this because it'll offend the golden retriever girls who think voting really makes a difference. They want to make a difference. And the men who go along with whatever bullshit these girls spout for the sake of getting laid once a month. These people looking for innocence and seeing innocence in things where there is none. It is absolutely disgusting. And I guess that's because most people are obsessed with sentimentality, and I've had enough of that. I've been to 2 graduations this week. It's disgusting. Follow your dreams. Be yourself. You're great. Blah, 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 blah. I think this is a record-long episode. Record-length episode, rather. So with that being said, I'm going to call it right now. Thanks to everyone who sent me emails and Ask FM questions. You can send me your emails and Ask FM questions if you want to hear whatever you have to say read on the next episode or the episode after that. I will get to it eventually. I do my best to answer everything that I possibly can. And as for other things, don't forget to check out Bandcamp if you'd like to support what I do. I got all sorts of stuff on there. If you plan on buying anything on Amazon.com, Click the link below. It'll take you to the Amazon front page and just add to your cart from there and check out within the 24 hours. You already know about that. And I think that about does it for end of show housekeeping. So until next time, you all take care of yourselves. Be good to each other. Talk to you guys later.